Kim, if you're ready. I don't have a
To
gavel.
protect the rest of you from me. I can never find
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Legal Affairs Committee and also Committee of the Whole this evening. Our main item on the agenda is our orders number 75 and 79, which deal with the charter review recommendations and also the home rule petition that is part of that process. Okay, with us tonight, so we have the Legal Affairs Committee, which is myself, Counselor Sweeney, and Counselor Rotundo, and our beautiful audience tonight. It's good, welcome, come on in. In our audience tonight, we have with us Marilyn Contreras from the Collins Center. We have Mr. Perry, our budget analyst. We have Assistant Solicitor, Ms. Oldmixon, and City Solicitor Williams with us. So just to sort of bring us up to the present moment, we have concluded our public hearings on this topic. So now the Legal Affairs Committee is charged with moving forward on the recommendations from the Charter Review Committee. So we have a number of tools from that process, including minutes. We have a red line draft of what the charter would look like with the adopted recommendations. And luckily we have a lot of guidance here. So, because this process is only done every 10 years, I have not gone through it myself, and so it's really helpful to have people who know what they're doing to help us. So what I'd like to start with actually is, I guess, just to set the intention that this meeting, what I'm hoping to get out of this meeting and this discussion is to flag parts of the charter recommendation that are areas of confusion, further discussion, or kind of disagreement from the recommendation from the committee and also the counselors who are here tonight, so that we can kind of move forward getting a sense of where we'll need to spend more time. And then one of the items that was brought to our attention through the public hearings were the amendments to the audit committee as the charter lays it out. And tonight we have Mr. Perry here to share his opinions and perspective on kind of clarifying what he views as the kind of the important topics of the audit committee amendments and the discussion that's been around that through the public hearing. Also, Solicitor Williams and Marilyn Contreras will update us on the process of the home rule petition and also weigh in on the amendments to the audit committee as proposed by the Charter Review Committee. Okay. Any questions to start with? Okay. With that, can we please open with Mr. Perry? And so just keeping in mind the things that have been said at the public hearings and what you've read about the amendments to the audit committee, the charter.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see you all. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to spend 5 or so minutes discussing the audit committee, which has been recommended by the Charter Review Committee by a majority vote under Section 6-10. I'm hoping to give you some background that may not be totally known. I've discussed some of this with you, with some of the city council members one-on-one, but I think it's important that we kind of clarify some of the things you've heard, what's going on, and hopefully more than happy to answer questions when I've completed my conversation with you. So a little history here, if I may. As many of you already know, back in 1995, due to a serious financial situation that occurred here in the city, they rewrote the charter with a whole host of internal controls and systems in place to protect the fiduciary position of the city, and I think there's a lot of good things that came out of that, which has protected the city to this date here. One of the things that was in there was what was the intention, based on my conversations with members of the then 1995 Charter Committee, was their hope that the city council would be responsible for the selection and oversight of the audit of the city of Beverly. And that was their intention. We fast forward many years. I came here myself in 2017 after I retired, as you all know, and one of the things I discovered in the first few months here is that the audit firm, Powers & Sullivan, which, by the way, are an excellent audit firm. There's nothing wrong with these people. They really do a great job. But they've had the audit at that time for like 20 years. Now it's almost 25 years. And it's been my professional experience that we should do what is known as audit rotation every so many years, because we've had issues in the private sector, things of that nature. And I just believe in audit firm, and when I was the director of accounts for the Commonwealth, I used to push that onto cities and towns as well. So I started making some noise about that when I first got here. And there was, at that time, and the city solicitor's here, we've had numerous dialogue about this. She knows this, so it's not a secret there. She had rendered opinion that, based on her interpretation of the charter, that it was the responsibility of the mayor to select the audit firm. I respectfully disagree with her. We're not debating it. She knows this is old history by this point. But one of the things that came out of that whole conversation was we at least got the audit firm to change their partners. So we got at least a different body in here. A woman by the name of Renee Davis, who's, again, very good at what she does, comes in here and does the audit now. And again, it's the same audit firm. She's here, and we still are under the practice that the mayor selects the audit firm based on the legal opinion of the city solicitor. So then we get into last year, we fall into the pandemic. Former Council President Guanci, and working with former Councilor Flaherty and some of you still here with us, wanted to review the charter. And so they put a committee together, as you know. I was tasked by the council president at that time. Would I assist them and work with them and try to assist in whatever I could do logistically, this being about my third professional oversight or review, if you will, of charters. One of the driving forces I received from several councilors, specifically Mr. Guanci, Mr. Flaherty, can't remember all the rest, but there was serious concern at that time that they wanted to address this issue. They wanted to have appropriate checks and balances back so that the city council, which was the intention of the 1995 charter group, would have the final say in the selection process of the audit firm, so that we can do whatever, that oversight, if you will, between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And I happen to agree with that from a policy perspective. So we started, the charter group started doing their job and working hard, and we got into this part of it, and Chairman Flaherty asked me, would I sit with the finance director and see if we could find some sort of a compromise. As you all know, no matter what your final decision is as city councilors, it will go to the mayor. The mayor has veto rights here, and there's no, once he vetoes something, that's it. There's no getting back. You can't override his veto. So part of the functionality of the Charter Commission, as Councilor Bowen knows, we worked several times and we sat with the mayor to try to understand what he was thinking, what he could accept, what he didn't accept. And I was kind of tasked at that time to work with the finance director to try to find a methodology or language or whatever the case may be to try to determine, can we find a way to restore back the original intent of having the city council select the audit committee, the audit firm, I should say. So having said that, I worked for almost 2 months personally with the finance director to try to find language. We had some really testy conversations on how it was, because quite frankly, what I was attempting to do in my dialogue with the finance director was to find a way for them to literally give up their authority to select the audit firm. We're trying to empower the city council in this. And after lengthy discussions, we finally compromised. And this is a compromise. We came up with the language to establish an audit committee, which is a good practice, by the way, and I'm glad we're doing that, but also the language with the 5 individuals on it. The 5 individuals we compromised on were 2 from the administration, which was the finance director and the city accountant, 2 people from the legislative branch, which was the chair of property and finance, who just walked in the door, and the budget analyst. And then we needed a 5th person. We didn't know what to do about that. And quite frankly, and I'm being very honest here, that's My job as your budget and management analyst is to be independent in my voices and to give you my thoughts. We were concerned that we wanted people on this committee that understood finances. We've been struggling a little bit, in my professional opinion, with our financial forecast committee, with people who are lay folks who struggle with understanding some of these things, and we couldn't have that same situation when it came to the audit. We have to do the audit by law. So we decided, and at least we compromised, thinking that the business manager at the school department would be an excellent candidate because that individual understood, or whoever's in that role would be a municipal finance person and understood those things. So we could spend time focusing on audits or audit responsibilities versus trying to do tutorials with lay people who didn't understand the business. So that's how we came up with those 5 individuals. I have my notes here, so I want to be careful that I get everything right here. So what we have is a proposal before you, and we came back to, or I personally came back to the Charter Committee and explained pretty much what I just said to you now tonight, and they kicked it around, and there was not a unanimous view on this. I think it was, Hannah, help me, 3-2, was it? Pinciaro, I think it was 3-2. And in fairness, Council Bowen was opposed to it, and so was former Councilor Ames. Councilor Flaherty, who's just walked in himself, and Julie De Silva, and I forget who is it? Oh, Rich Dinkin, they supported it. So it was a 3-2 vote, and there was concern. What this language does, it empowers the city council. The mayor has ceded his authority, at least in his interpretation, and that of the city solicitor, to give it back to the city council, which was the original intent back in 1995. That's what that language does. Now, I've read a lot of the commentary from our citizens. And as they say, democracy is a wonderful thing. Everybody has the right to their own opinions. But I have to share with you, and this is my responsibility to provide this, I am telling you there was misinformation that was articulated by certain individuals, whether in writing or in person, with regard to the intent of this language. First and foremost, I want to make sure, as now I'm talking to you as my role to you as counselors, do not lose 1 ounce of sleep thinking that if you incorporate this language, that we may possibly go back to what happened in the early 90s here, in that we're going to get in financial trouble. That's not going to happen. I am standing here, I'm glad I'm on BevCam tonight here, and I'm publicly guaranteeing you 100% that is misinformation. That is not going to happen. You have enough internal controls in place, the most important one being the role that I play with you to keep an eye on this stuff. Not going to happen. Don't worry about that. There's no correlation in a professional standpoint that will indicate that if you were to do this language, that we're going to get ourselves in financial trouble. If anything, I think it's just the opposite. It's more checks and balances with regard to it. That's not going to happen. I saw the commentary of everybody else. There were no secretive meetings that occurred. I did meet with the finance director. The charter review people knew that. There were numerous meetings where people were invited that never came. That's their choices. But there was nothing secretive about this. It was work done by myself and the finance director a little bit, and we brought it back to the committee, and they vetted it, played with it, and as you know, it was a 3-2 vote. There was some commentary that the mayor wrote this language. That is absolutely false. That did not happen. I wrote the language. Working with the finance director and coming up with a compromise, I wrote it. The only one who will maybe plead a little guilty is Marilyn Contreras and I, who's sitting here with us. We talked a little bit about some language, but in general, I am the author of that language. It was not the mayor. The mayor wasn't aware of it. It was the finance director, I think, who went back to the mayor and articulated what we were doing, and I think he agreed with his finance director. He felt if that's what you think we should do, that's what we should do. I talked to members of the administration within the past week. I've been a little busy this past week, but they still support the language as recommended by the majority of the charter review people. You need to know that. If there's different language that's going to come forward, it could be problematic. If we forward different language than what the Charter Review Committee has recommended to you by majority vote, and the mayor vetoes it, we go back to square one. You will have no say in who is selected as the audit firm. Zero. You're going to be just the way it is now, and I think that's a bad idea. And I'm urging you, I'm telling you publicly here that this is empowering the city council. This is improving checks and balances. This is going to improve the process because the selection process that the committee would recommend to you involves the city council being at the table and helping with the request for proposals and the selections. And the most important thing you have to understand that this committee then brings it to the city council. The city council is under no obligation to accept their recommendation. You can still pick any audit firm you want, but they will advise and recommend, and then it'll be up to the council to decide what to do. This empowers the city council. This improves checks and balances. This is good public policy. It's good public administration. And as your budget analyst, I am recommending that you do this strongly because it's the right thing to do and it improves the way we're doing this. Now, for those individuals who do not agree with this, and I respect that, we all should respect that. I have no problem with that. Whether they're informed properly or not is irrelevant. But what I'm concerned about is I understand what they're against. I have not seen a counter proposal. I don't know what they're for. And that to me is pretty important. If they have a better proposal, I'll be more than happy to review it and give you my opinions, but I haven't seen one. I just know what they're against. And I'm really concerned about that because we're running out of time. And not if they have a better one, that's fantastic, but it's a two-step process. One, if they got a better proposal, put it in writing, show and tell us why it's a good idea. But the number two thing, this is really important, whoever wants to do this has got to go sit and talk with the mayor, which is what the charter review people did on numerous issues, trying to figure out what the mayor would accept and not accept. So that it's ludicrous to think if we're going to come up with another proposal, just because individuals think they're right or wrong about it, and the mayor's still going to veto it, we're back to square one, and we don't have that checks and balances that this concept gives to the city of Beverly. It's a good idea in my view. So, for those, unless there's something new out there, and I offer publicly here, I'm more than happy to review it, but whoever wants to rewrite this or come up with a better proposal, I'm urging them, and we're running out of time, as we all know. We got to get this thing done sooner rather than later. It's almost a year and a half. They got to sit down with Mayor Michael Cahill and kick it around with him and see whether he can accept it or not. And I think that's incumbent upon anybody who wants to criticize this proposal. Madam Chair, I can keep going on forever about this, but the bottom line is this, and I really thank you for allowing me to go first here, because I'll hang around a little bit here, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. The bottom line is this. This is a good idea. I'm quite frankly speechless that this issue seems to be the most important one that's get more kick out than any other. I thought the school committee issue or the 4-year term, I thought that would be the stuff people would be jumping up and down about, but I'm really surprised over this one. But the bottom line is, it's a good idea. The administration is ceding authority back to the city council. It's a better checks and balances. You get to pick the audit firm, and it has my strongest recommendation as your budget analyst. And Madam Chair, that concludes my commentary. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you or your colleagues may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd actually what I'd like to do before we go right to questions for Mr. Perry, if Solicitor Williams, if you wanted to sort of add, if there was anything left out of that explanation that you feel would be beneficial for us to hear before we go into questions, please feel free.
Mr. Perry more than sufficiently covered the history of the evolution
Okay.
of the language. So, and I provided you with the red line version of the Collins Center language that was originally proposed, and it was edited after discussions with Mr. Perry and actually Mr. Dinkins and anyway,
Yep.
multiple conversations between you and the finance director. And I have extra copies if other members of the legal affairs. I didn't bring, I'm sorry, one for everybody, but would you like to see the red line version?
I think that'd be great.
Okay.
Ms. Contreras, am I saying your last name right? I'm sorry. Contreras, okay. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that piece of the discussion? No, okay. All right, in that case, how this will proceed is, being the chair, I am, you have one of these? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so being the chair of this committee, I'm going to allow for committee questions first, and then I'll go out to the council, the committee of the whole questions, and if I have questions after you've all picked this over, then I'll go at the end. That seems to be efficient process. So, questions from the committee? Go ahead, Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry, for taking the time to be with us tonight and to present to the council.
I'm sorry, Councilor Sweeney, can I interrupt for one moment?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. I meant to mention that, so thank you, Mr. Perry, for highlighting that the audit committee section is section
10,
6-10, and that is on page 55 and 56, in case anybody's still looking for it on their digital copy or whatever. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You and I have discussed one-on-one about the importance, and you alluded to it, the importance of rotating the audit firm, and this was actually a matter that came up in conversation with some of my fellow councilors here and leaders of our banking and small business industry. They had mentioned how that's a good business practice in the private sector. And I am curious if you could elaborate upon your discussions with the mayor and the finance director and other members of the charter committee about whether such a rotation requirement was considered, and if it was, why it was not ultimately included in the language that the committee has presented to the council.
Great question. First off, I never had conversations with the mayor myself on this issue. I have discussed at great length with the finance director, so that's where all my, so to clarify that.
Okay.
We did talk about, we didn't want to codify, like, pick a number. I used to recommend, as the director for the Commonwealth, 7 years. That's what I thought was a good number in my view. But we decided to not incorporate that in, or at least in the compromise thing, because we wanted the ability for the city to make its own decisions. In other words, the audit committee, maybe 10 years is a different group of people wants 5 years. Maybe they want to keep 10 years. We didn't want to zero in on a specific year, numbers of years, if you will, to allow flexibility depending on circumstances beyond our control. So to answer your question, that's pretty much why we didn't put a specific number in there to do it a specific way.
Thank you. To follow up from that, if the majority of the council, upon review of the recommendation of the audit committee, felt as though we should be instituting that in practice, regardless of whether or not it's on paper, and the council or the committee were to recommend the same, in this case, Powers and Sullivan, a firm that the city has used for years, what would the process be for the city council under this language if a majority of the council felt as though we should rotate the audit firm and suggested doing so?
Right. That's a great question. I mean, it's simple. You just reject the recommendation they bring forward. Then they're going to have to come up with, the next group, the next audit firm. You just, if a majority of the city council does not agree with the recommendation because they want to rotate it or whatever the case may be, you just make a motion to, or vote the Perry firm or whatever firm you want. You can easily do that under this proposal. You can rotate it all by yourselves. You have the final say if it goes as is.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And I do have one question for Ms. Williams, but I could defer to... Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Williams, one question I have, I know Mr. Perry mentioned it, that there was differing viewpoints with the original language regarding the ability of the council to select the audit firm, given that the council didn't have procurement power that the charter allocates to the mayor. I am interested to just hear your take, reading through the language. Obviously, this proposal is much lengthier than the current language in the charter. The section I'm looking at in particular reads, the council shall submit the award of the audit and proposed contract to the mayor to be signed. That, to me, seems as though the mayor would still have some discretion to potentially, as is the case now, retain the authority to have the final say, essentially, as to the selection of the audit firm.
So, this language obviously is very different from what is currently in the charter.
Mm-hmm.
And it does make clear that the authority to select the audit firm lies with the city council. which was in my opinion, what was lacking in the existing language. And my point of view at that time was, if that is the intent, then the language should be changed to clearly reflect that intent. You are correct that the contract has to be signed by the mayor, because the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city and that position is the position that has the authority to bind the city in contract. Now, Mr. Perry, I don't know if you remember, we talked about this. Potentially, right, I suppose there could come a time where a mayor said, I'm not going to sign the contract. That would be a problem, a crisis, and I believe you had a response at the time about, the state's never going to let that happen.
That's right.
I don't know if you want to repeat sort of what
Well, yeah, we did discuss this. I mean, there's the selection, and as the solicitor has indicated, the legal authority to sign contracts. I mean, the city council approves things, but you don't sign contracts. That's the responsibility of the mayor. So, I mean, you set the budget, but they sign, the city, the mayor or their staff signs off on the warrants. It's a similar process that you're going to approve something, the mayor will sign off of it. I can't envision, what are they going to do? But at the end of the day, the Department of Revenue is going to come and say, get an audit firm in there. So I wouldn't worry about that. I'm comfortable that that's not going to be an issue. A lot of things that you approve, the mayor still signs off on. It's going on every day. It's normal practice. It's normal public administration, and I see this in the same vein, if that worked. That's kind of my thoughts to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I will add, this language is far more empowering than what currently exists in the charter. So it's definitely better than what's there now, for sure.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that and share the opinion of many others that it's important that the council retain the check on the executive through this passage. So thank you both for answering my questions.
Any more questions?
Not on this section, no.
Okay, Councilor Rotundo.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Couple of things. Conversations I've had with some of the people in the signature of that letter with the concerns. From my understanding historically, and I don't know who would actually have this, the Home Rule Charter, which basically grants authority to the mayor to do veto with no override power. How was that in essence created? Was that created from the original charter document?
I believe that's a home rule state law petition stuff. Maybe the solicitor can help us with
created
that.
back in 90?
The question was, why can the mayor veto something and the city council can't override, and it's a home rule petition?
In this particular situation?
No, in general.
The whole,
In general.
so Ms. Contreras seems to have the
Okay.
answer, so,
It's in the Home Rule Amendment to the state constitution.
Right.
okay, which,
It says that you can submit a home rule petition to the
Right.
state legislature and in cities with the approval of the mayor.
and that
That's-
was created back in 95, correct?
No.
That was 1966.
Oh, okay, so it was.
This is a constitutional
It's
amendment.
the state
Thank you.
constitution
That's
separate from
perfect,
Beverly.
so that's why I want to make sure, because when I had this conversation, one thing is, well, that's an authoritarian subject, so it came a whole nother subject, and I'm like, it wasn't created under this charter. but-
It was not,
And I wanted to make sure, some clarification purposes, to have that on the record. And then the other thing that I see, it is struck out, and I know you mentioned the reason behind it, but the two citizens, and that was, I know, was contentious with some of the members, that they wanted to have two citizens for complete transparency, or have better transparency of the process.
I've heard that as a thought, but I haven't seen a proposal, yes.
So, I mean, those were really the only other two things. I mean, I really don't have much different. I mean, what I see here right now is we have 5 members, 2 from the city, 2 from the council, and 1 from the school department, balancing it off. It's going through our procurement office, who's gonna put an RFP out, correct?
Correct.
Which then will make the recommendation from the audit committee to us council, and the council still ultimately has the power of it, in essence.
If you pass this, and if the mayor agrees to it, and if the state legislature and the governor signs off on it, the answer is yes. If you do not do this,
It's status quo.
it goes back to the mayor selects the audit firm, and that's it.
Perfect.
That's what's currently going on right now.
I'm satisfied.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from council members?
I
Oh,
just have
I'm
one
sorry.
quick
Go
follow-up
ahead.
question, Madam Chair,
Please.
to the point that Councilor Rotundo made about the city needing to put out an RFP. Is there a minimum number of bids that the city would need to receive through an RFP for an audit service?
Actually, audit firms are exempt from the bidding process, so you can kind of work it out there. They usually do go out because what the audit firm will do, what the administration is doing now is what they call a scope of services, and they'll put out what you want to look at and things of that nature. But there is certain exemptions with audit firms that are not consistent with 32B, I think it is, on that. So, but we will still be putting out. Well, the audit committee will be vetting this stuff here and coming back to you with a recommendation, and we'll go through that process and then sign a contract.
Okay. I ask because I think it could potentially be beneficial to have such a requirement of the audit committee to bring forward more than one firm, even if there is a preferred recommendation to give the council.
And great comment, and I think that what would happen through the chair of property and finance, that individual will have that ability to vocalize those concerns on behalf of the council, as well as your budget analyst, whoever he or she may be. So this is all doable under this proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Solicitor Williams, did you want to add to that? That's a great question.
By way of analogy, what the city often does when we issue an RFQ, and there are multiple bidders, create basically a matrix. And the RFQ is going to have the criteria, selection criteria, and rule for award. And then the committee could submit that to the city council, and you'll have the matrix. And you can weigh and review, what factors are more important than others for you. For example, if the council wanted a new audit firm, perhaps that is given greater weight than other considerations. So I think that it's perfectly within the council's authority to request you receive a report on everybody who submits a bid. The key will be, I think, drafting an RFQ that will solicit enough interest in, submitting a bid.
Thank you. I appreciate the additional detail there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Anything
Chair.
else?
No.
No, okay. Counselor Rotundo, did
I'm
that
all set,
spark a
thank you.
question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, questions from other council members? Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. And so I have sort of a comment / question. This might be anticipated. So I really appreciate the context and agree with sort of those overall priorities, which is why I was also a bit surprised at how passionate some of the responses have been so far about the small technical details that I think are really at issue here, because I think the overall consensus around clarifying and restoring the council's role in providing a check and balance by selecting the audit firm seems pretty clear. There doesn't seem to be an argument against that. The only argument against that is the sort of legal argument that it wasn't clear in our current charter that power had not been clearly stated and therefore couldn't be used. So that was the whole reason for having the discussion to begin with. But since then, there was no proposal on the table to, one option would have been to clarify the language in the other direction and say, actually, the mayor procures the audit. That was not really floated as an option because there seemed to be consensus throughout the process that everyone on the charter committee understood the original intent, and the mayor was willing to discuss ways to clarify that still allowed for some role of the finance department in ensuring that an audit firm was not selected that they couldn't work with, essentially. That was sort of my interpretation. So it seemed like through the process, what you described are key points in the process that I also remember in that way, but to me there was a larger context where we had those discussions as a committee from early 2021 until about June and reached a compromise between, the status quo of the council having no role based on the interpretation of the current charter, which is also sort of an unstable status quo, because at any given moment, a different city solicitor could interpret things differently potentially, or the Attorney General's office could interpret that language differently. The whole idea is it's not clear language. So that unstable status quo. And, we received from the Collins Center some examples of other city charters that simply state, so we had Pittsfield, Everett, some language proposed in Methuen, that simply state the council selects the audit firm. No audit committee, no role of the finance team, no nothing, just clearly that. We realized, as you said, that probably wasn't going to fly for very good reasons, and talked about lots of creative ways to make that compromise, and reached a solution that I believe did have unanimous support in June among the committee. That is the language that I think is now in front of the legal affairs as a red line, that included the rotation piece that you recommended as a practice, not necessarily in the charter, but we found language that as a committee we were comfortable with, that I believe said, I'm gonna look for it here, so that the process would happen at least every 5 years, and no firm or partner of a firm would be able to be awarded the contract more than 3 times or twice, 2 consecutive contracts. So when you say there was no alternative proposal, we as a committee unanimously passed a proposal that included the rotation and that had a 7-member committee, as was mentioned. So this idea of a negotiation happening of, okay, we'll have 2 city people, like city staff, 2 council staff, and who could the 5th person be? I'm not sure how and when that conversation happened, because we had a negotiation that went on that led to essentially 4 council-related people, a sitting councilor, the budget management analyst, and 2 citizens appointed by the council, and 3 city staff for a 7-member audit committee. And there were the objections that you've shared about finding qualified people for those roles. So I understand that that was maybe not a perfect solution, but it was one that was on the table. And so in comparison to the proposal now on the table, I was more comfortable with the previous one. So if you're looking for those alternatives, the ones that I think achieve what you are saying this proposal achieves about clarifying the council's role, providing additional checks and balances, and really strengthening the process. The language that we had in June, I felt accomplished those things. And then a subsequent round of negotiations happened between June and January when this red line came back to the committee. So I guess my question is, where you're saying sort of there are critics of this language who haven't proposed something else. My big question is, what was so wrong with the prior language that it was not acceptable to the finance team and the mayor's office? Because I understand why 3 members of the Charter Review Committee felt this language was better than nothing. But that wasn't the choice in front of us, and I don't think that's the choice in front of the council. We're looking for the best solution, because hopefully the charter doesn't change very often. So we're looking for a solution that works across multiple administrations, multiple councils, multiple years. We're not looking for just a stark say yes or no to this language answer if there is a different way of looking at it. So I think the big question is sort of what was so wrong with that previous proposal, and are there other things that could have been considered, for example, putting the rotation piece back in, something like requiring certain things of the audit committee to make sure that that balance of power stays as intended, or anything else that was missed there that would be closer to the original intent.
How's that?
That's the end of my question.
That was a long one.
It was.
You answered.
I've learned from the best here.
I guess you have. Council, you answered your own question. It's what will the mayor support? And if you wanted to put one of those other proposals forward, this is what I would suggest you do. You're in a leadership position now. Try to get your colleagues to go along the way you think. One can make an argument that was a little bit better. But the mayor would not support it. So we tried to, as I jokingly referred to, politics is the art of compromise. And that's what's going on here. It's a compromise. He has a different opinion, and his finance director has a different opinion than you and some of your friends. And that's the way, as one former city council, that's democracy, okay? And I worked very hard to try to find something to empower the city council that will fly with this mayor. And we found it. Now, if you want, you could make an argument that your proposal is better. I'm not even going to debate it with you. But you have to convince your colleagues now. And more importantly, you got to convince the mayor. Being a city councilor, I would suggest you go sit down with the mayor. Maybe he'll go along with you. And you can come back and it'll work for you. But as I understand it, as I stand here tonight, in front of the television cameras, he will not, it's my understanding, he will not support that. But he will support this. And that's the simple answer to your question. That's what will fly and get the authority back with the city council.
Can I just ask you a quick follow-up? So I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate your work trying to broker that solution, because I know it's a lot of time and it's a lot of balancing interests that don't always line up. So I very much appreciate that. And I think my main question is, based on that response, will we hear in a public setting why the mayor wouldn't support a 7-member audit committee with some citizen representatives and audit rotation? Because I have heard, and the mayor even shared in our public hearing, which sections of the recommendations he's not in favor of. But I did not hear clear reasoning from him as to why not. And I think in the spirit of democracy, that's what I'm really looking for. And I think it's unfortunate that that opinion, that he's not in favor of this provision as previously written, is being sort of assumed as therefore, like, if we know that fact, then that closes off a whole line of conversation among the Charter Review Committee or among the council about what would be best for the city, without actually requiring the mayor's participation in that public conversation about why. And so it's hard for me, it was hard for me in the Charter Review Committee when that revision of an already existing negotiated compromise, not a starting point, but a compromise, further negotiated to a different compromise. I didn't feel comfortable supporting it at that time because I didn't feel like I had something I could explain to the council, let alone to my neighbors, about why I supported that instead of the previous recommendation, other than the mayor didn't want me to. And that was just not sufficient for me, and it's still not, essentially. So if there is a compelling reason why this is better than that, not just why this is better than an unstable status quo, I'm fully open to supporting something else. I think through the committee process, I changed my mind about several things based on what other people said. So it's not trying to dig in here for no reason. It's just, if we're going to change from a strong proposal based on best practice that already, I would say, cedes more power to the executive than most other similar charters, I would need a really good reason to do that. And so I don't know if you know more of the reasoning behind that objection. It's not on you to know that necessarily, but that's sort of where I'm coming from.
I think I'm gonna pause on that question only because it's very similar to the question you just asked. And it sounds to me like, Mr. Perry, you answered, please correct me if I'm wrong, with any one of us could speak to the mayor and talk to him about alternate amendments to the charter, just to kind of feel out if that would be acceptable. And also there's been mention multiple times about counter proposals. And I understand, Counselor Bowen, you, and having seen the sort of original red line version of what the committee had put forward, I understand that you're saying there was another option on the table that the committee had discussed. So I'd love to hear from Solicitor Williams or Ms. Contreras about the process of counter proposals, since we're discussing them here, and I don't know if that's a formal thing that you know, a counselor would bring forward, or if that's just something to sort of present upon voting.
I mean, I think that the committee has made its recommendation to the council, and if the council wants to amend any language that's been proposed, somebody can make a motion to do that, and there can be a discussion, and it can be amended, and then the amended language could get approved, and then it would have to go to the mayor for approval as required by the state constitution. So, I don't want to presume to answer on behalf of the mayor as to why the language as originally written was not acceptable, but I can tell you my understanding. It's really two things. One is codifying or putting in the charter that no accounting firm can be awarded more than 2 consecutive contracts. I believe that the view is that that's too restrictive, and that the city council should be given the discretion in weighing the different criteria established in the RFQ to make that judgment itself, based on the performance of the audit firm and the evaluation of the audit firm, which is now a requirement that was added into the charter, or the proposed language, and then reducing the size of the audit committee from 7 to 5 individuals. And I think Mr. Perry spoke to that at the very beginning, about sort of the somewhat unwieldy nature of a larger committee. So that's my understanding of why those 2 provisions a request was made to modify those 2 provisions.
And those are the 2 main changes from what the committee had recommended to what is actually, well, sorry,
Originally,
to, yeah, like an original amendment to, and the difference to what the committee has recommended. Those
Right,
are the
plus
2
the
main
addition.
differences.
Plus the addition that the audit committee shall meet following the conclusion of each annual audit to evaluate the performance and effectiveness of the audit firm.
Great, okay, thank you. Any other questions on this particular topic? Counselor Houseman?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly where to start. I've asked Solicitor Williams to send me a copy of her memo, which opined on the authority of who selects, just as to give me a little bit more background. While the discussion's been going on, I have been trying to find, so I guess I'm looking for some clarity for whoever is best thinks they can do, most appropriately do so. When I search code and charter and ordinances as presently adopted by the city, and I type in audit, I get 2 responses. I get section 6.9 independent audit, which is part of the charter, and then I get a separate, one other provision, and it is audit of accounts, but it pops up as an ordinance, not as a charter, ordinance provision, 26.17. Which says the Committee on Finance and Property at the close of each fiscal year shall be responsible for the selection of a certified public accountant, so forth and so on. That's pretty straightforward, but it's not part of the charter. And so I guess what I'm saying is when I look at this chart back here, it talks about the replacement of independent audit charter, section 6.6-10, but according to our city website, as best I can tell, there is no section 6.10. It's only section 6.9, which reads, independent audit, the city council shall annually provide. It's actually the first part of the first sentence of what we're provided here in this red line, up to the comma. It tracks that language identically. So I'm kind of stepping way back from this conversation and asking for some clarity about where is 6.10 that we're supposed to be replacing. So whoever can respond to that. happy to
So six,
learn.
I can just quickly.
yeah,
if that's
6-10 is a new
It's new.
section. That's
okay.
why
It's
it's,
new, it's new numbering.
Ms. Contreras, you can come up to the microphone, thank you.
Article 6 was revised by the addition of a new provision, 6.2. So all of the all the provisions following that were renumbered.
Okay, so when it says replace 6.10, what it's really saying is replace 6.9,
Yes,
in effect.
yes.
Okay, that's helpful. Confusing until I understand that, okay. So, then, to my other question about the other section, which talks about audit of accounts, which shows up under ordinances, which presently is section 26.17, audit of accounts, it presently reads, "The Committee in Finance and Property shall, at the close of each fiscal year, each financial year, be responsible for the selection of a certified public accountant or firm of accountants to perform the audit as required by the charter." So, just to clarify, this proposed 6.10 language would replace presumably that paragraph in the ordinance. It would certainly supersede it because it's charter, not ordinance. Is that correct? This provision presently in the ordinances would go away and be replaced by this language?
Solicitor Williams, thank you.
So you are correct that our ordinances include that language, and that ordinance is unenforceable because it is inconsistent with the charter, which takes precedent. So it currently is unenforceable. It was passed, I believe.
And that's your
on-
memo, essentially?
It is, and I believe it was passed during Mayor Crean's administration. And to get to your point, to go back to the first sentence of the proposed new 6-10, I actually, at the risk of getting into some minutia now, and we can resolve this at another date, the language reads, "The city council shall annually provide for an outside audit." We can talk another time about it, but I would be a fan of taking out "provide for" and say the city council shall annually select an outside audit firm to audit the books of. Let's get rid of "provide for,"
Yeah.
right? Because that was the big ambiguity in the charter, in my opinion, to begin with. Let's just get rid of that language, assuming that the budget analyst and the Collins Center think that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Given the discussion, I think that's certainly an improvement.
Yeah, I would agree with I would have no problem with that. I'm assuming, Marilyn, yeah, we would have no problem with that.
So, and unless there are, you have a follow-up, okay? Not a follow-up, but a brand-new question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's a brief one. I think just looking at the language, the red line version, I guess what I'm thinking about now as I'm listening to what the responses have been is that I can absolutely understand the point of view, and I think it's been a well-made argument that it could be overly restrictive to codify not more than 2 consecutive contracts, given that I appreciated the answer given to Councilor Sweeney that the council could at any time decide not to award the contract to the same firm. But I think I'm feeling more uncertain as to the reasoning behind not including the 2 Beverly residents, that language. And I guess my question that goes along with it that I'd already written down before I looked at the red line again was, my question is, what about, and I guess Mr. Perry, this might be a question for you, but anyone else but what about the issue of, and this is not about the particular players in the roles right now. I think that's just really important. Anytime we're talking about city roles, I think we start to picture the people in the role. But to me, it does feel like a potential stumbling block at best and an issue at worst. To have the 5 members, I'm looking at it, they are all people who have a significant role and significant responsibility for the city, what talks about the books and accounts of the city already. And so I guess I'm just curious about what about the sort of circular feeling of the audit committee that selects the audit firm, even though I know the council could then reject it, but the recommendations coming from this firm and then this committee evaluating how well the audit firm did, including 5 people who do have significant authority and role in the city, despite the fact that they are pulled from different parts of the city. I understand that. But I do feel for myself the wisdom of the 2 sort of very neutral parties, residents, provide some check and balance on the audit committee itself. And again, not about the players in these roles right now. That's my question, I guess.
Sure.
Great
Thank you.
question.
So I can respond to a couple of thoughts, at least as part of what the dialogue was at the time. The concern of having those 5, number one, those 5 individuals, 4 of the 5 of them are professional financial people. The 5th being the chair of property finance, could be, I guess, but not as, currently is not. We have a lawyer, so I tease him a little bit about that. But, so 4 of the 5 people were professional people. There was concern to make sure that it didn't turn into a tutorial committee where we had to teach people what had to be done, how this works, we could get right to, or the committee could get right to it, because we were concerned about the model of the Financial Forecast Committee. There was a lot of tutorial there, and it was very bogged down, it was very difficult. We can't mess with the audit. We got to get the audit done under the single audit act. So that was the first thing. The second thing, I would take a slight different view from your thoughts. They're all the same. The budget analyst is not in that role. The budget analyst keeps an eye on what they're doing. He or she is the one who pushes back on things. He or she is the one who may recommend different things here, or he or she is the one who plays an independent role. And also, you have the chair of property and finance on behalf of that checks and balances of the legislative branch versus the executive branch being there and pushing back on things. I'll be honest with you, one of the envisions I've had, I've pushed privately, it's really into the nuts and bolts of debits and credits, but I think sometimes we should be doing scope of services and checking on things, or requiring the audit firm to check on things, and that would come from this committee. Right now, we don't have a voice on that scope of services to say maybe we should check the salaries of Councilor Sweeney. I don't know, I make that up here sarcastically, but the point being, right now, the administration decides what gets looked at. Now it's going to change. And again, the concern was having people on the committee who did not understand their roles, and it would bog it down. It's a time-sensitive thing. That's the reason. You can accept or reject the reason. That's your decision, of course, but that's what went into this.
President Flowers, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Perry. And I think one of the meetings that I did attend of the Charter Review Committee, this was part of the discussion, as you were just talking about that. Some of that, it is ringing a bell for me. I guess I appreciate your answer. And I guess what I'm just thinking about, and I'll continue to think about, is I think you're absolutely right. And again, that's why I think it's important, in my mind, not to think about who's in these positions now, because what you just described is how it should work in the best case scenario when you have ethical people in the roles. I think I'm thinking about what would be the case if there was a budget analyst who wasn't as invested in pushing back or checks and balances. And I guess I hear what you're saying about now we have more of a voice in the scope that would be accomplished. I guess I'm thinking even with the addition of the red line language about the 2 residents, in my mind, wouldn't negate the ability then for the budget analyst to have that extra voice.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, and I do note that it says, and I guess we don't need to get into now how possible people feel this is, but I do note that the original language said the council president shall seek residents to serve who have a background in finance, accountancy, preferably in the public sector and public administration. So I don't know that we need to dig into now whether people feel like that's possible or not, but it seems to me that was the nod towards trying to address the tutorial part. And the last thing I'll say is, I guess, in my day job, many of the people involved in keeping the books and doing the financial aspect are volunteers themselves, because it's the kind of organization it is. And not everybody by any means is a professional financial someone who's in the professional financial sector, but we do hire an audit firm and conduct audits, and that, I think that can be done even by lay people, especially folded in with others. So, thank you, and thank you for your answers, Mr. Perry. That was also
Thank
really
you.
helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I was
Sure.
hopefully making
Go ahead.
concluding comments, but I didn't interrupt, look like one more question.
I do have one question, Mr. Perry, and this may be better directed to Ms. Williams or Ms. Contreras. In light of this conversation, if the council were to ultimately amend this proposal or another proposal by adding or subtracting language as we see fit, is the mayor in his review, if he so chooses to veto a section, only able to veto the entirety of the language to have it revert to the current charter language? Or could the mayor be selective in a veto in saying, let's say the council, for example, chooses to add back to citizen representatives or the rotation requirement? Could the mayor selectively veto that one section while maintaining the rest of the proposal?
I'm going to defer to, I have an opinion, but I think it's a city solicitor question.
So, in my view, whatever the language is, the city council and the mayor have to agree to it, right? So if the mayor, were to strike, let's say you put in the 2 consecutive contracts limitation, and the mayor were to strike that, well, that's not language you approved, right? So at that point, in my opinion, the section doesn't pass at all. And you go back to the charter as it currently exists.
Okay, thank you.
That's my view. I don't know, Marilyn.
Just to clarify.
And that would be my view as well, but I didn't want to speak for the solicitor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I make some concluding comments?
Please, and that might even resolve some of these questions, and
Mine's
thank
on
you.
that last point.
I'm gonna let Mr. Perry speak first because he has limited time.
I apologize, and thank you for your
That's okay. It's nice
consideration
that
for
you're
that. I
here with
have
us.
to unfortunately leave. Just some thoughts, and I'm glad the solicitor weighed in on that. Whatever you decide as a council, and it's your policy decisions, I'm not here to debate it, but you have to weigh in what is going to be acceptable to you as councilors, and also what's going to be acceptable to the mayor. I'm really concerned, at least in this area, that if you do something different, he may veto it. If you decide you want to modify it, I'm advising, maybe it would be Councilor Bowen, I don't know, she's leading the charge in this a bit, to at least have the courtesy of meeting with the mayor to see what he will and will not accept. Go out, have a cup of coffee, go to lunch, whatever works. I mean, people meet with the mayor all the time, and I think it would be wise of the council to get his feedback, which Councilor Flaherty, former council, the chair of he met with the mayor numerous times to try to get his input and feedback because they were trying to find something that would ultimately work. I would be extremely disappointed as your budget analyst if we provided something in this audit situation that he ultimately vetoes and we go back to the way it is today. To me, that's unacceptable. So I'm urging you, I'm recommending anyways, as my role, I'm kind of away from the charter folks and back to you people now. I'm recommending you do this unless you can convince the mayor otherwise. Having said that, Madam Chair, I wanted to quickly just say thank you to the city solicitor. I've haunted her about a ton of this stuff. Malin Contreras is a wonderful, a lot of people don't really know her. She is like the resident expert, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on charters. You're very fortunate to have her there. And Councilor Flaherty, who haunts me on Saturday mornings here, former Councilor Flaherty, has done a great job. But I apologize. I'll come back, obviously. But those are my thoughts on this issue. And as you all know, you can call me one-on-one at any time. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Hopefully, and I apologize, I'm already late.
It's okay, thank you.
Thank you very
Mr.
much,
Perry.
Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And best of wishes to you all.
Thank you. So I noticed that Councilor Houseman and Councilor Bowen both had follow-up questions. I would like to ask, are these quick? Are they things that have already been said? Okay.
I think it'd be quick. I've gone back and forth on the question of this provision about 2 members of the public. And I think if you could really be certain that you would get qualified people, and when I say qualified people, people who really do have finance and accounting background to be selected, I think that certainly would be acceptable, but I do think that in city politics and with the charged conversations around budget may be slightly different than those at the church. I don't know, but I would be concerned that I do think an emphasis should be put upon the professional staff to do the selection work. I'll just leave it at that, to keep it brief.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Counselor Bowen?
Thank you, and have plenty more ideas I'm happy to talk with people about, but just the question was following Counselor Sweeney's question to clarify further, because I know we discussed this elsewhere. If the council passed certain language as recommended changes and the mayor struck out portions, my understanding was those sections would not go forward, but the other unrelated provisions in the full package would still go forward. So it's sort of a line item veto per se, but by section versus by
I
line.
think it's sections.
Okay. Just to clarify, so it wouldn't invalidate like
No.
the term discussion or the
shouldn't.
school committee discussion?
It shouldn't.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
And that's sections of the charter. So other sections of the charter could move forward. It would be just maybe section.
Then you do return to the language as it now exists.
Defaults to the original form. Okay, thank you for that clarification and that question. President Flowers.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a quick point of clarification, if I could, through you, in response to Councilor Hostman.
Please.
My analogy was not to compare the types of finance or make comments about what types of budgeting, although it's significantly complex in both settings, I'd say. But my point was that I think lay people can very successfully navigate alongside other financially trained people hiring an audit firm, because that's what we're thinking about, who would assist in hiring and evaluating the audit firm, not performing the audit. So my assessment was, I feel more favorably inclined towards having these two residents to help balance this committee. When I'm looking at the red line, alluding to Councilor Bowen's sense that this was unanimously passed, and feel less committed. I was sort of making a comparison, less committed to this idea about the two consecutive contracts, because I think that's been well explained. But I think I feel perhaps more optimistic about the way that two residents could successfully contribute to a committee like this.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to clarify.
My pleasure. Okay, so with that, I'd love to sort of move forward from, I'm so glad we got to talk about that, because at the public hearings, that was a major topic of reporting kind of back to us. So I think it was good to have that top on our list. There are a couple of things happening there's something happening simultaneously as we're discussing the recommendations. Solicitor Williams and Ms. Contreras are working on what will eventually become the wording for the home rule petition. And my understanding is that because this is kind of a very technical piece, a technical document, that you would need to work on it now, or else we'd never complete this process. Can you both update a little bit on where you are in that process and sort of how that will tie into what we're doing here?
So we have been fortunate to have Ms. Contreras do the actual initial draft using the state legislative drafting manual. And many members of you on the council have seen a home rule petition before in other areas with respect to liquor licenses or extending the chief's retirement age. It's the same type of document. This document will read something along the lines of, in listing 10 sections, change city election to regular municipal election, right? So that will be one thing. Another section would say, delete 2-year term and insert 4-year term. I mean, that's how sort of granular it is. And at this point, we have a draft of every proposed amendment in the document that you have. It's my understanding, and we've talked a little bit about it, once, we'll wait, and then whatever the council finally, we know what the finished product is, the home rule petition will get amended accordingly. So if any of the language gets tweaked, that will get tweaked. If something doesn't pass, it'll get taken out. And then that's what gets submitted to Representative Paracella, presumably, I would think, with the draft. Red line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and there is a transmittal process.
Right.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone have questions about that particular part of the process? So the home rule petition will reflect our vote as a full council. The Legal Affairs Committee will take a vote, which will then go out to the full council for further discussion and voting. I think the next thing I'd like to do is, if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Contreras, could you help us sort of, what I'd like this committee and then the committee of the whole to think about are areas, clearly the audit section is one of them, but what are the other major areas that you're seeing as a counselor that you anticipate big questions of, not in support of the amendments, so that we have a sense going forward of what our next meeting discussion can be centered around, similar to how we focused on the audit section 6-10 at this meeting. Would you? Yep.
I want the committee to identify what they saw as what they wanted to concentrate on.
Perfect. Okay, so let's start with legal affairs then. If you can kind of anticipate areas of major questions or areas where you kind of know that you disagree with the recommendations.
I don't know if this will fall into the context of the question, but I mean, some of the things we've had the document for a while, we've been hearing from people. The mayoral term is, obviously we're looking to push that to a referendum, as well as the school committee terms. So those are two sort of easier tasks where we're looking for the voters, and this would be the time to discuss that. Or should we hold up? So I'm just trying to think of procedurally. I mean, those things I think we all have a sense throughout the community that those are really major issues that we want the people to vote on, and it shouldn't be the body of 9 making 2 major decisions on that document. And the other things are the smaller things of the wording changes and things of that nature too. So those are things I think we can draft a little easier. And then, obviously we've touched upon the audit part, which was a big contention, as we all kind of weren't suspecting it to happen. Right. We thought those 2-year term to the 4-year term and the 2 school committees would be a little more
we haven't even gotten into that.
Yeah, so I mean, those are the things for me. I mean, the other recommendations, there's a lot of information that we've been looking at currently as we've had this document in front of us for a while now. But those are some of the things I think, those are the easier pickings right now, in my opinion.
Okay. Councilor Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To build off the points that Councilor Rotundo made, and this is similar to how the document that the Charter Committee presented to the council was laid out. Thank you, Councilor Bowen and former Councilor Flaherty and others for putting this document together. I feel as though there are probably the top tier, most notable changes that Councilor Rotundo mentioned, the change of the term of the mayor, the potential addition of school committee members. Sounds like the audit committee is close to, if not in that tier as well. And then I would say there's a second tier of changes that warrant discussion, but may not as significant as the changes, the school committee, the mayor term, but still more significant than the technical changes. Those were highlighted, and I've heard from residents both informally in conversation, and then also we heard in our public hearing, the update to the citizen initiative petition process, because it was an occurrence that took place twice the previous term, filling the vacancies in the city council and school committee roles. And then the other one that I was not mentioned in the public hearing, but I have heard in conversation, is if we are to go to a 4-year mayoral term, if there are any changes, and I admittedly need to study this in greater detail, changes to a recall provision for the mayor. I think that's something that would warrant discussion individually, and the other changes, after my review, appear to be much more technical in nature aside from those.
Okay, great, thank you for your input. I just wanted to clarify something that you mentioned, Councilor Rotundo, if I can remember it. About so if we vote, let's say, for example, this Legal Affairs Committee votes to accept a 4-year mayoral term, let's also say that the full council votes to accept a 4-year mayoral term. At that point, within the home rule petition, it would be written that we accepted that, but it would go to a vote of the people. Is that accurate? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, there will be a section of the special act that proposes questions that requires certain questions to appear on the ballot. And it will say, shall Chapter 52 of the Acts of 2023, providing a 4-year term for the mayor of Beverly, be accepted? Yes, no. And then underneath it says, this will take effect upon voter approval, but not otherwise. So then you go back to the 2-year term if that's not accepted. And then there'll be another section that says that this provision will take effect at the regular municipal election to be held in November of 2025.
Okay, and my understanding is that that's not a requirement, but a very sound political choice to make, that we could add that we could change the charter in that way, but it's best practice to put it on the ballot. Is that correct?
It's not so much a best practice. The legislature expects it.
Okay. They would not approve it really without that. Yeah.
Right. They would really question why that would go through
I would too.
without voter approval. That was the case prior to the passage of the Home Rule Amendment, and it continues to be. It's considered a charter revision. A charter revision, it's an act that revises the charter as opposed to amends the charter, which is, a distinction that is made in Chapter 43B, and revisions do require voter approval.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, other questions from committee members at this point? Okay, I'd love to hear from the Committee of the Whole on, you do have one, I'm sorry.
Procedural question, Madam Chair,
Sure.
in highlighting those that we feel have or will garner the most attention and those that are more technical. Is there a process that we will move through in voting both in subcommittee and then ultimately to approve sections based on whether they are categorized as those that have attracted more attention versus the technical changes, or are we just going to go through section by section, both here in subcommittee and then as the committee as a whole?
I love that question because it keeps this meeting moving forward, so thank you very much. What I'd like to do, given the response from the Legal Affairs Committee, what I'd like to do is actually at our next meeting dive right in and go section by section.
Okay.
I think we can do that. And if I'm wrong, we'll be flexible.
Thank you.
And then, as far as how the full council holds it, continues the process, that would be up to President Flowers to navigate that process. That's my understanding. So, I don't know if you want to speak to that now, President Flowers, or if you
Sure,
surprise us.
No, I can elaborate on it. I think in part, my intention is to be somewhat informed by how things come out of subcommittee, where there's more discussion or less. But my inclination would be then to also, especially if there were language that were recommended to be changed, to go section by section, to mirror the process, but for the full council, if that makes sense.
Great. And if I'm so appreciative that I can call on the people in this room, but if you wouldn't mind just weighing in after what you've heard today, do you feel, and Chairman Flaherty, you've gone through this process a couple times, so I appreciate your perspective too. I think that, like I said, Legal Affairs is ready to go section by section on this process. I would appreciate your perspective too from Ms. Contreras or Chairman Flaherty, if you wanted to just kind of give us a little advice, I would take it. Anything? Yeah?
Oh, no, you go
That would be my recommendation. Having served on the elected charter committee 25 years ago, and then serving on this for the almost past 2 years, that's would be my recommendation, to go section by section. And I'd be careful not to go too far down the road a little bit, because, you know, we had meetings of 2 or 3 hours and going into it. Not that I want to say you don't have the responsibility to look at it, but we spent a lot of time, the committee spent a lot of time debating. You guys were involved, we've updated you. The mayor was involved. That's why we try to get the mayor involved. We could have not involved the mayor, but we wanted to kind of give you a document that was, again, a compromise of ideas, concerns, and we came to a conclusion. Not everybody agreed on certain things, but we gave you a document that you all could look at, and we gave you some opinions on the major subjects. You honestly, and then even our committee, we finally said we need to get something to the council, because you could debate all day, all night on this. So my recommendation would be like to see what the committee did and see what the work that they put a lot of work into. And I understand, as counselors, having been on council for 20 years, you want to do your due diligence, you want to look at that. But I also want to sit there and say, you know what, you could be up here for another 2 years talking about it. So please be, I don't say the words respectful, but understanding of all the work that really went into it, and going section by section, and being, knowing exactly what you want to do, because you could look at every section and spend an hour, 2 hours on every section. So that would be my recommendation. I'm not sure, Marilyn, you have anything different to add?
No, I agree with everything that Tim said. If you go through section by section, it begins to give you a feel for how the document holds itself together, and you might spot areas that seem a little discordant, and so that's valuable. But if we spend a lot of time on colons and semicolons, it's going to be a little exhausting.
I agree. And I understand that some sections will come at the beginning of the charter that are actually changed because of something that happens later, a later amendment. But I think that still will be good to move through.
It may look discordant, but we'll be able to direct you to how it works within the entire document.
Thank you. The last question I have for our committee is related to, as you know, one of the recommendations changes the makeup of the school committee. And I know that President Abel, School Committee President Abel, was present at, I think it was the March 31st meeting, and shared some input. I'd like to know the opinion of the Legal Affairs Committee. Would you be interested in hearing or kind of presenting, sharing communication with the school committee that would sort of ask them to take this up on a near future agenda, to weigh in as a public body in a public discussion on their, individual thoughts on a change to the makeup of the school committee? Councilor Rotundo?
I mean, as a matter of respect to them, yes, but the documentation and the minutes that have been provided to us, there's been a lot of reading on it. I mean, I have a good gist of what's been said and done amongst it. I understand where they're coming from, so I have a good understanding of it. Out of respect, and if you want to invite them, I don't have any objection to that, but, I'm pretty comfortable with how the minutes had gone, especially with the certain subjects that I did really concentrate on, that one being, so.
Yeah. So my thought is not so much that we would have a joint meeting at all, but that they would have this particular the changes to the school committee would be a topic on their upcoming school committee agenda so that they could discuss publicly. And, I mean, we could request that they, we could just watch their meeting, we could read their minutes, we could sort of, request Chairman Flaherty, go ahead.
I think that's a good idea. And just so you know, that our committee invited them in, and there was a couple of them who spoke in favor. Some of the school committee members didn't even know that was actually proposed. They were speaking as not necessarily as school committee members, but as individuals. But at the public hearing that we had some past school committee presidents that spoke in favor of it. There are pluses and minuses. I mean, the education reform talked about lessening some of the power, but whether we agree or disagreed, we thought as a committee that it was best to bring it forward. And the other thing is, something like this, and Marilyn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this will go, something will go back onto the ballot, so the voters can make that decision whether there needs to be two more people on the school committee. So that's kind of the reason why I think as a committee we, thought it was a good idea to kind of move that forward.
That makes sense. Is that, can I confirm that if the change in the school committee? Okay, that's great, thank you. Counselor Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly think it would be valuable if the school committee decides to take the initiative to publicly weigh in and vote on this proposal. I know I appreciate the Charter Committee for convening these members, and I've spoken to present and former school committee members as well, but I think for both our sake and then for the public, when this, if we approve it, when this measure does go to the ballot, it would certainly be valuable to know the formal position of the school committee on this.
Okay, great. I do have one follow-up question for, I think, Solicitor Williams. Would the school committee actually need to take a vote? Or they could just have a discussion, right? There's no,
They don't have the authority on.
to approve or,
I mean,
okay.
if you really want to know their view as a body,
Yes.
it would be appropriate for them to vote, but there's no requirement that they do anything.
Okay,
And you could act without the school committee weighing in.
right, okay. Thank you so much. So as the Legal Affairs Committee, does somebody have a motion based on my question? I don't know if I can kind of sway the,
Motion to allow the school committee to review and give a recommendation, is that what you're looking for, or?
I'm looking for what the Legal Affairs Committee wants, so I don't want to kind of
No, I
project
understand,
my
no, and I understand, and I'm
own
not,
idea.
and I understand and appreciate that, so I
Yeah.
guess for procedural purposes, are we looking for, so let me make a motion to allow school committee to review and send a recommendation to the Legal Affairs Committee.
Should we motion to, just building off of Ms. Williams' recent point, should we motion to request that the school committee weigh in, given that we can't really allow them to, it's essentially their prerogative to say yes or no, that then has no impact formally on the proceedings of the Legal Affairs Subcommittee and the council.
Solicitor Williams,
So
thank
I
you.
think one way I've seen public bodies do this is to vote to delegate to the chair of legal affairs to send an appropriate communication to the school committee requesting it or inviting them to give the legal affairs committee feedback on these proposed changes. And so you don't have to worry about the exact wording of the letter, but that's the basic authority that you're granting or giving to the chair. That's one way to deal with it.
That sounds very simple. Thank you.
So then,
Okay.
I motion to allow the chair of the Legal Affairs to have communications with the school committee in regards to the 2 additional school committee members.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye, motion passes 3-0. Thank you, Councilor Rotundo, for braving through that. I'm learning too. Okay, so to clarify, our next meeting, we will be going section by section of what the Charter Review Committee has recommended as amendments. And we will have our team here to help us, thankfully. Are there questions from from the council? Councilor
Thank
Bowen?
you. And it's a process question. As I was prepping, I realized the minutes that were circulated didn't include the public hearing that the committee held, and so I just wanted to see if everyone had had access to that. Either, I think it was recorded,
Great,
maybe?
great question.
Or on paper. And the other thing is, I was kind of starting to go back.
There is a document, I remember getting it,
Okay,
for the one you held in like April.
Yeah.
20,
yeah,
21.
yeah, that one.
I'm just going to repeat what you said, Ms. Contreras. So Ms. Contreras said that the minutes from the public hearing are in the document, the folder that includes all of the minutes. Am I understanding that correctly?
I don't have the folder, I do remember getting the minutes.
Okay, so how about we'll just confirm through the clerk's office that we have access to the public hearing documents. I think that's a great point. Thank you.
And the other piece that I was looking back to were some of the memos that the committee received from the Collins Center that were helpful in those deliberations, but weren't included as part of the minutes. I think probably because they were like confidential work product to the committee. And so I was just curious if there are, maybe it's just for priority issues identified by legal affairs or at the full council level, but if there are certain elements of those memos or certain dates of those memos that are worth sharing with the council, and if that's even possible, because I just know I was going back to find some reference points and found them helpful, and based on where we are in the process, thought there might be some of those that are.
It's a great point. I guess procedurally, are we able to have access to those memos as we review, or are they not part of the public documentation?
I think that you could get them in a modified form, because the ones that were addressed, they were addressed to the committee.
Madam Chair, if I may, for
Can you-
those who view
Oh,
on BevCam.
Yep, thank you. I can do that. Thank you. Would you mind, I'm sorry to make you get up and down repeatedly, but yeah, because that way BevCam can hear your wonderful answer.
Oh, all right. The memos were written for the committee when we were initially exploring whether or not an article had to be changed, and what were some options for changing it. So now you're in a different situation. You've got their changes. So I can, go through the memos and point out the rationale for why the change, the rationale we provided for making the change.
Thank you. I think
And, the sample text we provided.
that would be helpful. Thank you. Councilor, President Flowers.
Thank you. I just clarified with Counselor Bowen to make sure I was passing on good information, but it does look like BevCam has that remote public hearing also archived, so if people didn't see it yet and want to watch it rather than just read the minutes, thank you to BevCam. I didn't click all the way through because I was afraid YouTube would just start playing in my microphone, but I do see that it's here, 4/15/2021, and Counselor Bowen confirmed that was the date.
We could watch it together.
Just a
Councilor
quick
Rotundo.
question, sort of to clarify. The memos you sent to the working committee of the commission, or the committee, was for them to get to the decision that they made to give to us. So the reality is the recommendations in the red line documents are what came out of those memos. So really we're working off of this from their recommendation of all their work that they did from the memo. So the reality is we'd be going backwards in a sense on the memos, because we'd be really using their minutes and what everything's been recorded. And I'm just trying to,
I think if we modify them, it would give you a sense of the background of how we presented the information to them and how they made the decision. They're not long memos. They're like 2 or 3 pages most of the time. And just trying to demonstrate, here's what you have now. Here's what other people are doing. Here's, whatever we have found valuable in terms of clarifying provisions or expanding provisions to be more clear. That's the kind of thing it would be.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here, and I hope we can continue this good work at our next meeting. I would accept a motion to adjourn committee of the whole.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And a motion to adjourn the committee of legal affairs.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, BevCam.